This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com, and this is not a wrestling or MMA interview for anyone tuning into this. We do cover the UFO subject on this channel. The fans have been asking for more UFO-related content. So today I have Robert Earl White joining me. His family was involved with a UFO incident when he was very young, and I'm going to get him to explain it. This incident occurred in New Jersey. To start this off, where did it occur?
This occurred in a small town called Lower Alloways Creek in southern New Jersey, not far from the Salem County nuclear plant, which was about 3 miles away from the incident. This was a country area, backwoods, farmhouses, and it happened near a road with a little one-way bridge on it, a very old bridge, which was shut down after the incident and has remained closed till this day. So that gives you an idea of this area. And throughout the years, there has been other sightings and that relate to my case. But basically what happened, 1991, April 21st at 9:18 p.m. at night. My aunt, who lived next door to my mother and my house, we lived right next to each other. And behind our house, you could, see the marsh area. And there was a small line of trees. My aunt next door woke up to go use her bathroom. And as she was using her bathroom on her second floor, she looked out her back window and she witnessed something hovering there, making no sounds, with blue lights around it, almost elongated, with a white light coming from the middle of it. No sound whatsoever. She's watching it for a little bit, and then she goes back into her bedroom. She picks up her phone and she calls next door my mother. So my mother, she was watching a baseball game with two of her friends at the time. And she goes to the back of the house where the phone was. And she said, hey, she picked up the phone. Hey, what's going on? My aunt next door said, there's something hovering behind the house. Look. So my mom's looking and she sees the same object. It had three blue lights and this bright light in the center of it. And she's watching it. My mother's friend that was on the couch got up, came running over also, and so did the other woman eventually. And they're all witnessing this all at the same time while my mom's still on the phone with my aunt next door. So they're watching this. Then all of a sudden, red and orange sparks start shooting out of this thing. And before you know it, a bright flash, and this thing shot straight to the ground. My mother hung up the phone immediately and called the authorities, 911, to report that some sort of aircraft just exploded behind our house. So I'll stop there. You got any questions?
No, but I just want to point out to the fans, you were very young at this time. You have some memories of it, but you know about this situation mainly from your family talking about it for years because this was such a big moment in their life.
Yes, and afterwards, what happened the day after MUFON came, we did not call them. The Mutual UFO Network came. They did an investigation. We have articles on the case that I've recently discovered about 4 months ago. Unfortunately, my mother passed away about, 6 months ago, and she isn't here to tell her side of the story. And unfortunately, I found this evidence, these articles from 1991 talking about my family's case with great detail. Military bases that were called, FAA flight administration called. No one was claiming that this was theirs. There was multiple search and rescue teams. So basically, after my mother hung up the phone, she waited about 10 minutes. Police came. They took initial report. Where was it? What did you see? My mother knew better than to say the word UFO. Otherwise, no one would have taken this seriously. And regardless of if it's a UFO or some sort of military craft, when you see something that large explode near you, it's a traumatizing event. So police left shortly after, say 13 minutes. They took a short report. 25 minutes later, two men wearing black suits, and a gentleman in the Air Force that came in 2 separate Lincoln black town cars came to our house 25 minutes after my mom made the initial phone call. My mother let them in. At the time, her 2 friends were still there. They came in, they sat down, my mom and her 2 friends, on the couch, and we had a coffee table in front of us. And the men in black, they pulled out a notepad and a piece of paper, and they sat it down in front of the girls, and they said, "Can you draw 3 different types of extraterrestrials?" My mother's 2 friends, they started laughing. They thought it was funny. The men in black asked them to go ahead and leave, and they did. Keep in mind, at this point in time, it was almost 11 o'clock at night. It's a lot of things went on. And as this was going on, the man that came with them from the Air Force was actually trained in hypnosis. And from that point, after my mom, she actually drew 3 different kind of extraterrestrials. One she called the blues, one she called a Nordic, looked like you and I, and the other one is your typical little gray alien thing. So they hypnotized my mother very briefly. At that moment, a lot of things came back to my mom that she was completely unaware of. And the men in black said, "Do you have any questions?" My mom asked 3 simple questions. My mother asked them, "Are these things dangerous?" The men in black replied, "If these things were dangerous, do you think we would still be here?" The second question my mother asked them was, "Why don't people know about these things?" The men in black replied, "We're doing everything we can with preconditioning. Within the next 10 years, you'll see signs of it in medias, music, movies, all over the place." Now, after my mother being hypnotized, she actually started realizing that this is a real phenomena and these things are actually real. And she was concerned. So the third question she asked the men in black is, "When these things are taking me, what would happen if something happened to my child, me, which was 3.5 years old, and my elderly grandfather that lived there at the time, who was 90, very old?" And she was concerned that if anything was to happen to us, and she wasn't there because these things are abducting her and using her or whatever, her main concern was to protect her family. And the men in black replied to my mother, "They use small gray aliens that stay behind. And if anything was to happen to your child or your grandfather, they would have you back." And they snapped your fingers like that. My mother said, "Thank you." Then the men in black made it a point to say, "Hey, tomorrow there's going to be investigators, newspapers, UFO researchers coming here, and you will say it was a helicopter." And my mother said, "Okay, I understand." The men in black and the gentleman from the Air Force, they left. We never saw them, never heard from them, nothing ever again. And that was that. And on a side note, that was what was happening from my house. The rest of the night, my mom was on the phone with search and rescue helicopters late into the morning. They had a search that went on for 2 days. But while all this was going on, my family did not leave the house. But there was stuff going on at the actual site where this thing crashed. And before I get into that, do you have any questions?
There is a fan on here asking if the men in black had any specific smell to them that your parents described ever.
That's a good question. I have heard reports of men in black sightings where they have bad, sulfury, stinky, almost reptilian, rotten smell. These men did not smell like that. They did not have glasses on. They did wear black suits, and they did have like a fedora hat. But honestly, they looked like you and I, but they were extremely strange. They were blunt. And I would probably say the only evidence of how strange these guys were, I don't know if it's military, tactics or something like that. But when they were holding the pencil before giving it to my mother and her friends, they were looking at it and holding it like they've never even seen one before. Which it was just very one of those small details where just something in you says, this ain't right. That very strange, but I no kind of smell or anything like that, and they really looked like you and I, less hair, but they definitely had eyebrows and stuff like that.
And what did they identify themselves as when they arrived?
They really didn't. The Air Force did the introduction, where he was in uniform. It was clear as day. There wasn't much introducing. They knocked on the door. My mom let them in. And, at first she thought they wanted to get more information, on what she saw and what was going on. And now looking back, and after I get into the next part of it, um, I really truly believe they already knew that this thing was in the area and they were long on their way. That's the only logical way, unless they have abilities to time travel. But there's no telling how long this thing was hovering behind before my aunt saw it. So this is next to a nuclear plant. Anything flying around there, believe me, our military knows about it. And I guarantee you they had this thing on radar. And so going more into the story.
Oh, one before you go in further, you mentioned that MUFON, who is the group of people that investigate a lot of the UFO sightings, that they did a report on this. Is that report out there somewhere where people can look it up?
Yes, my YouTube channel, Robert Earl White, Order of Light. When you click on the documentary, I did it in 3 parts after I found this evidence. I always kept my mouth shut because I know no one would believe my family without having some sort of proof. So after I found this, I made 3-part documentary. I released it on YouTube. I did it using my cell phone. I waited 30 years to talk about this event, and I'm getting it out there. If you go into the description of the YouTube video, I have both articles and what pages they are on there. So you can click and you can read the MUFON articles for yourself.
And as far as the crash itself, and you said there was an investigation to see what the crash was by the police and so forth, did it make the news, local news or anything? Is there news articles about it?
Yes, within the MUFON articles, they did the liberty of writing out the entire KYW Channel 3 eyewitness news in Philadelphia. Our main news in Philadelphia came the next day twice. They barged in on my aunt. She was a realtor. They walked into her job, cameras ablaze. My family did not want to come out public. They were afraid of the, repercussions, especially after my mother was threatened by the men in black. She was not going to risk losing her child or anything like that, or being called crazy UFO woman. My family remained anonymous. The next day, newspapers came. The Philadelphia News came. MUFON investigators came. The place was going crazy. My aunt, she's still alive, and she said her phone was going off the wall and she did not want to be a part of it.
And finally, Mr. Showbiz Guy had a question. Why did your mom's friends leave her with the men in black? Because they appeared to be military and they were showing up with an Air Force guy, and it's just like, okay, we're not going to interfere in this military investigation or interrogation.
Yeah, they weren't that kind of. The other girls didn't pick that up of this being a threatening. At first, like I said, they truly thought that they were just going to be questioning them on what they saw. And when the 2 girls heard the word extraterrestrials and they started laughing, they didn't want to be there anymore. It was just a point. It was getting late and they left. There wasn't anything. My grandfather was still there. I was upstairs, in my room. There was people there. They weren't going to hurt my mother. The Air Force guy was very, military, professional. And when you see a crash, you just assume they're going to come and ask you questions,
All right. I'll let you continue on with the story.
All right. So, meanwhile, while my family was home, from other reports of eyewitnesses that were at the firehouse at the time after the crash, and other people that got curious and wanted to see what all this commotion was. This one lane bridge and this road, on the left of it, there was nothing but marshland and the lower Alloways Creek, which an important side note is the nuclear plant runs out into that same creek. And along that creek and near that little bridge is where this thing went down. So about 35 minutes afterwards, it was a Sunday night. The fire guys had to go out to the place. We're out in the country. By the time they got out, it was about, 35 minutes. And as they're approaching, heading towards the bridge, off to the left, they see a Coast Guard cutter boat. And they see armed men and one on land, and they order them to turn back around. The situation's under control. And that's exactly what the firemen did. After they went back to the firehouse, the few eyewitnesses I had that were there at the firehouse, they reported that, they saw tarps on the ground and there was Coast Guard there, and they told them that the situation is under control and they ordered them to turn back around, and that they suspected it was something strange, but other than that, not much. So some of these girls that were curious after hearing what the firefighters said, they went out on their way to investigate the scene more, and some of other witnesses also saw flatbed trucks with them loaded with black tarps that same night. And some witnesses actually saw a tree removal service. They hired some sort of tree removal service to remove a couple trees. Also in the MUFON articles, there are multiple witnesses. Other than, the three, there were people in their cars that saw this. And one of the things the Men in Black did is they went around and they reassured anyone after asking them, did they hear or witness anything? If people said no, they would just, reassure them it was a helicopter. If people said, yes, I heard something, there was a house that was actually closer to the scene. He said he thought he heard something, but he thought it was a big gust of wind. He actually heard the thing crashing. That was the only sound, was when it crashed to the ground. So, and they reassured him it was a helicopter. In the MUFON reports, it's reported as a helicopter. Here's the kicker. No helicopter was ever found, nor was any helicopter ever missing. When you have a triangular craft and you have it at a certain angle, it can look elongated. And that's what was going on. It was a triangular craft with blue lights around the three tips and a bright white light from the middle. And with these MUFON articles, it's very interesting, some of the stuff. The one investigator went back 2 days afterwards at 12 o'clock at night to look for tire markings and evidence. 2 days afterwards, it was already out there, and no power lines, no street lights. He wouldn't have seen anything, because the firefighters also mentioned as they were pulling up, they saw huge gouges in the marsh, freshly made. And the ultimate kicker, a few days afterwards, my grandmother went down to the area. We used to ride her bicycle constantly up and down this road. And she saw, a couple areas of all the reeds laid over, whether that was from the UFO or from the search and rescue teams. She still saw all of that. And nowhere's in the vicinity was there any fire marks. No fire marks whatsoever.
Very interesting. So as far as these triangular craft, I've read and I've heard from people at To the Stars Academy, Tom DeLonge's organization.
Good organization.
UFO. Yeah, I've heard that these triangular craft often appear to be like surveying geography and are often seen closer to the ground compared to the Tic Tac craft and the circular craft. Have you read into and investigated at all, like the difference between these triangular craft that are one of the three types of craft often seen?
Yes, I've spent a lot looking into this, and throughout looking through my area's history to find out more about my case, I uncovered a lot of other triangular cases, and they're all centered around this nuclear plant. And if it's not around this nuclear plant in North Jersey, it's near the Nike nuclear warhead missile silo site, or another nuclear plant. It's something about energies. And it's interesting that you say that they're surveying. And I believe that whatever these things are, they're also surveying energies. And along with that, I believe that the craft we saw, I'm going to go on a limb here, but I believe it belongs to a species called the tall whites, and they are a form of grays. And they can be sort of hostile. They're one of the oldest kind of grays out there. They're called tall whites because they have a light gray complexion. But I believe that they have a great interest within energy, and not just man-made energy, but also natural energy, because many of the great power sites around the world, you'll find these crafts. And you're absolutely right. Triangles have been reported. One of my good friends that live out in Texas, when he was younger, he saw one maybe 2 telephone poles high above a house, extremely low. It was massive. They come low, but you don't really hear about that with the saucers or the TikToks, but it's very interesting. And you start reading these reports, and the light in the center of it, it's a big one that stands out in most cases.
Yeah, and you also read that, as you mentioned, they're very interested in the nuclear silos as well as nuclear energy and so forth. There is something about that that either concerns or interests them, from what I understand. Ashura has kind of an off-topic question. He says, or it might be a she, do you have a Freemason tattoo on your hand?
You're very, very, very observant. A little bit of traveling.
If so, which lodge are you part of? They're asking.
That's an old one. I don't want to get into it.
Okay. Biggest Richard Cranium asks, was there any localized blackouts or EMP activity, like shutting down electronics in the area the night of the incident?
Good question. Not that I know of, but it's important. A little side note: the bridge, that's still closed till this day. That's where I shot my documentary. That bridge, they shut down that road, and that bridge, it's been closed. When MUFON came at another time, actually to hypnotize my mother, MUFON actually did end up hypnotizing my mother. I haven't found the records on it, and I'm working with MUFON in finding more of this information. I'm also working with a couple other really great people that are helping me get to the bottom of it and find more info. But when MUFON came, and my family, they were actually trying to record the hypnosis session. And in our house, there was some sort of technical interference that was causing a lot of problems with recording. Also, my mother used to tell me that my baby monitor would go berserk constantly. So I think that kind of gets at what he's asking. There was some minor electrical problems in the area, but we didn't have any power lines. We're out in the country, pretty simple.
CAPA wants to know if the men in black just vanished afterwards, or did they drive away? I'm going to guess it seemed like they were human, right?
They drove away. They got in their cars and left 2 black Lincoln Town cars.
And what's your theory about what these UFOs might have of interest in nuclear energy or nuclear bombs? Ashura is saying it could be how they recharge their craft, but what's your theory?
Yeah, nuclear energy, it's definitely powerful, and it has a lot of properties. I believe there's multiple layers to this. If human beings were to go to another planet, the first thing we would be concerned with is doing research and experiments and understanding how the environments react to certain organisms. And there's many layers to this. They could be monitoring How does nuclear energy affect the area around? What about the people? You know, my mother was being abducted. Could that possibly be a catalyst for all of this? You know, when I was younger, someone came to our house. They went to all the houses, a researcher, and they took people's baby teeth to do testing on. We never got the response back, but later years I've looked it up, and they've done this throughout the years in the area. And along with things like this, there's certain kind of energies which can be used to help certain ships and help get other things done, like you're saying. Someone actually reported to the National UFO Center, which has been helping me with my case, that in the same area, a pastor saw a UFO near the power lines having some sort of interaction with it. And this was kind of around the time, you know, of when my case went. And his name is George A. Filer. He runs the National UFO Service. He's a retired U.S. Air Force major of intelligence. He personally chased UFOs over England, and he was involved with the McGuire and Fort Dix alien shooting back in the 70s when an extraterrestrial was shot on base. So I have great people helping me put all these clues together, and it's all connected, and it's energy, you know?
And you've been mentioning your mother allegedly could have been abducted. That's mainly from hypnosis, though, her abduction memories. She has no conscious memories of any abductions, right?
Well, at first, that's how it was. At the time, other than my mom waking up with strange scars and unexplained things happening to her and having weird dreams, she had no recollection of what was actually happening. After the hypnosis, it all came to her. After the hypnosis sessions, anytime this phenomenon would happen again, she suddenly remembered it. It was like the hypnosis like broke something, you know? And it's like once she remembered, she started remembering this occurring over and over and over again. And recently talking to, you know, my dad and stuff, and us, you know, talking about this, he's even experienced some strange things with her sleeping next to him, you know, just really weird things that he even has a hard time comprehending. And it's a strange phenomenon. And it turns out that this was going on with my mother since she was a baby. This was a lifelong event until the day she died. And her drinking alcohol, she said, you know, when she was drunk and stuff, she wouldn't have these abductions. They wouldn't happen. And I believe, you know, having alcohol in your bloodstream, if people are doing scientific research on you, that's not going to go good. It's spoiled milk, you know? And unfortunately, I'm not saying that's the only reason she drank. You know, I'm not blaming alcohol on this, but my mom didn't have anyone to talk to about this. And a lot of people ridiculed her and mocked her. So it's kind of my mission and goal to get out there and help people come forward and just listen to them. Whether I think it's crazy or not, just being a voice and being an ear to listen and saying, hey, you know, I believe in you. You're not the only one. You know, what are you going to do about it?
And as far as the abductions themselves, you think it's just for scientific research? And as far as cattle mutilation, someone had a question earlier. Was there any cattle mutilations reported in that area ever? Because a lot of times those are linked to UFO sightings.
I'm not going to say there hasn't been. Now that you mention it, I should probably start looking into that. There has been none that has been reported that I know of, but I would really have to do some digging. But it's definitely something worth looking into for sure.
And what do you think about the U.S. government? Now the Pentagon and the Navy have finally come out and said UFOs are real. They've released 3 clips, but they admit that those are just a portion of the footage that they have. And there's actually a lot of other evidence out there that just hasn't been released yet. We're supposed to get more evidence, as you know, including apparently about materials that are not of Earth coming soon. So what do you think about the government's change since about, I guess, December 2017? They're no longer denying that UFOs exist. They're not saying that they're necessarily extraterrestrial, but no known other country has this kind of technology, and they appear to be in our airspace, and there's nothing we can do about it. We don't really know what their intentions are yet, according to reports.
Yes. So I'll say this. At the time the Pentagon released that footage, that's when I found these articles. And, you know, my family was told to keep their mouth shut, and they didn't need to say it, but it was on behalf of national security. So my family had to live out our lives thinking that we're crazy and that we saw something that don't exist. And the Men in Black did tell us that 10 years from now, this was 1991, they said 10 years from now, you know, we all know what happened 10 years in 2001. Another big distraction, just like the Pentagon's timing of releasing this information was impeccable. And when I saw this, I was outraged because there are so many people that have had to suffer at the cost of national security and had to lose their mental well-being. I have family members that are actually sitting in mental institutions over this. You know, it's ridiculous. And now they want to come out nonchalant and show 3 of the worst videos. On my YouTube channel, I have a video called 4 UFOs Better Than the Pentagon's. I suggest your fans watch it because it knocks them out the water. Knocks them out. I got UFOs flying near commercial planes. How about that for national security?
Who recorded those videos?
My good friend, Jody, and she's in there. All the credit. She's out in Colorado, and she was using her P900 camera, and she captures these things all the time. Also on my channel, I have other UFOs that I've personally caught. I have one UFO with 3 different people, 3 different cell phones recording it. I got a lot of great stuff out there. And, you know, when I see something strange, I always use the heaven above app. So I know it's not a satellite or some anomaly or a meteor. It tells you anything flying above. So I try to keep my stuff legit, you know.
And to wind this down, there's a few people on here that have mentioned Dr. Steven Greer in the comments. I used to think he was a little bit credible, but his most recent documentary seemed to be a huge amount of propaganda. Obviously, he's making a lot of money off of his documentaries and excursions. And he's also saying that all ETs are friendly and we have nothing to worry about because they communicate with him telepathically. So we should just trust what he says, not worry about anything. I'm just wondering what your opinion is on Dr. Greer as a researcher yourself.
Yes, so he's became really, really popular from the whole CE5 thing. In the MUFON article, it's labeled CE4. This is not a new term. And, you know, ever since this has happened growing up, you know, I knew they were real. I would always look up and just ask them, like, hey, can I see you? Most of the time I wouldn't, you know, but I've never stopped believing. And I believe when you put certain things out there, you manifest them into existence. And everyone has to keep in mind, these things are no different than us. There's good, there's bad. You can't just, you know, got to take things with a grain of salt and take things as you see them, you know, as you experience them. And, you know, be wary and careful. There are good ones that are protecting this planet. And guess what? There's bad ones that want to destroy this planet. Star Wars is actually a great movie.
Yeah, it's a little frightening to think about everything that's going on and the different intentions of the different groups, because we know there's 3 different types of ships. but there could be a lot of different species out there with all different intentions. Even in this world, all of us human beings don't have the same intentions. So to say that all extraterrestrials have the exact same intentions, I don't necessarily buy that. But to wrap this up, I mean, you're releasing videos yourself. You're doing your own investigations. Where can people look you up and follow your work?
Yeah, so check me out on YouTube, Robert Earl White, Order of Light. I'm also on Facebook. I have the Order of Light Facebook group. I've recently just made a TikTok, Robert Earl White. It's Order of Light 777, doing stuff out there. The YouTube is my main thing where I'm uploading everything. And one thing I just want to say shortly is to all the fans out there of wrestling and MMA, in fighting, you're trained to react off of action. In these situations, there's no sort of training or preparation on how to react. It's comparing it to getting into a cage or ring and just laying down. It's a serious event. And if you have your story, please reach out and share it. I want to hear it and help anyone and just be an ear to listen and help get the truth out there and to find out more about this phenomena. There are 110 different species that I know that have been cataloged. My good friend who's an author just published her book, A Gift to the Stars. Elena Denan, she drew out personally 110 different species, which galaxy they came from. It's the new Alien UFO Encyclopedia. And there are more species than that. And you have different species working with certain species. Half of a species is good, half of it's bad. At the end of the day, we are aliens, bub.
And Ray from Flint was mentioning there is also, just as we've said, there's a connection with UFOs and nuclear related stuff. There is a connection of them with water. We've seen, even in those military videos, they can go underwater and they can operate in water similar to how they can operate in the air and outside of our atmosphere, which we don't have any vehicles here on Earth that can do that. But what do you think could be happening with these UFOs underwater? Like, what do you think they're doing there? And what do you think the connection is with the UFOs and water?
There's a lot of underground bases all throughout the water. And there's some of them that the entrance is through water. Also, water is a natural conductor of energy. And so, they could just be following. It could have something to do with the magnetic fields that are caused and the vibrations off of these aircrafts that manipulate gravity. Could be setting off some sort of EMF. And in order to initiate, smooth sailing, maybe there's certain lines of energy that, help them stabilize their craft as they get lower to the ground. Or if they're that low, they figure, hey, if I got to go down, rather go down on water than land.
Yeah, because I have heard from some military people, ex-military, legitimate people, that these things can move underwater faster than any submarine we have. And it's very interesting, all this information that's coming out now. But I'll let you wrap up this interview however you want. To let you have your closing remarks. Thank you very much for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And yes, please check out my YouTube channel, Robert Earl White at the Order of Light. I've waited 30 years. I kept my mouth shut for the most part. I was a professional musician. I was a pastor at one point. I lived in the Middle East teaching English for 2 years. I did a lot of different things, and I couldn't really talk about this situation. After finding the evidence that I needed to validate my family's claims, I want to make sure that people don't have to go through this anymore, and that any information that our government does have, they need to release it to us. And we're not asking for disclosure. We're demanding it. There's a difference.